Following an investigation by RNZ, the government has started to shine a spotlight on one of its more open secrets, political lobbying. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins has commissioned long-term work on regulating the industry, which includes a code of conduct and removing swipe card access to Parliament. Member of Parliament and ACT leader, or ACT Party leader, David Seymour from Ngāpuhi is with us now. Tēnā koe, David. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, tēnā koe and tēnā koutou katoa.
Now, we spoke to the Prime Minister yesterday around this idea to set a voluntary code of conduct for lobbyists. Give us a brief explanation around what a lobbyist actually does.
Well, a lobbyist is usually someone who works professionally for businesses or interest groups who are worried about laws getting made. So, for example, if you were the forestry industry, and this is one of the examples that the guy on Espin used it as RNZ rules, and you were worried that pine trees might not get included in the emissions trading scheme, so you wouldn't get paid for carbon absorbed by your pine trees, then you might hire a lobbyist to go and say to the minister, look, we don't think this is fair, and here's why you should do it differently.
So, David, keen to understand if you believe that political lobbying has had a negative or positive impact on Māori businesses who may not have the same financial backing to influence political outcomes.
Well, I just make first of all, I will answer that. I think it's probably a negative. And I make a general comment that, one of the reasons I believe in free markets is that they create opportunity. They give everyone more of a shot of creating something new. And if you're starting off a long way behind, then you want to be in a growing economy. And I just look at how the Ngāi Tahus and Tainuis have succeeded over the past 30 years. They've done that in quite a dynamic period of the New Zealand economic story. For the 50 years before that, when New Zealand was locked down and you had to have a license to import something and you had to have quota to produce something, or you had to get permission for this or that, it was actually quite difficult for Māori to advance. Most of the advancement in Māori economic development has happened in a period of New Zealand history when the economy has been freer than it was for most of the 20th century. So that's my first point, is that freedom and opportunity are good, if you are starting off with less in the bank and more to gain. They're bad if you've got more in the bank and more to lose, because there's more competition. I think when it comes to lobbying, that's a minor part of this argument, that the more complicated it is to get heard, then if you're someone who doesn't start off in an advantageous position, you're going to be further behind if there's more bureaucracy to navigate.
Very nicely said. Hey, look, former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern gives her valedictory speech today. Now, in the past, you two have had some names flicked back and forth. Have you put those to bed now? Is that the way things are?
Yeah, look, I think that the relationship between us, and I hope should say the same thing, we've always had a cordial personal relationship. I mean, we started out 12 years ago in the backstage of the Auckland Central candidate debates. And we've never had, I don't think, a negative personal relationship. But I think the reason that people have found that quite confusing is that while I don't have any personal, opposition to her, I think she's been a disaster. I look at New Zealand today, I look at housing. And if there was one thing that this government came in to do, you cast your mind back to 2017, it was kids sleeping in cars and garages, house prices were too expensive. You fast forward 6 years, that problem hasn't been solved. House prices are higher, mortgage rates are higher, rents are higher. The only real improvement is that some kids have moved from cars and garages into motels. I guess that's something. And then I look at the issue around Te Ao Māori. I think that New Zealand is a more divided place, and it's more divided because you've had a government that has gone down the pathway of explicitly making race part of its public policy. And I don't think that most New Zealanders, Māori, European, Asian, black, white, Cuban or Asian, actually want a country where you are categorised based on your background. But basically every law that's been passed under Ardern has had that feature. And I think it's going to take a long time for New Zealand to take a long walk back to, saying this is a country where fundamentally we're all human and all have the same basic constitutional rights. We're not there right now, and that's her legacy.
You don't think that has to do with past wrongs being corrected?
I think it's really important to correct past wrongs. The question is, do you do that in a liberal democratic framework, or do you do that in some people call a tiriti centric Aotearoa with, tangata tiriti over here and tangata whenua over there? And I don't think that approach is sustainable in the long term. There's many countries that have gone down the pathway of having people divided and categorized by, who their ancestors were. There's been a lot of countries that have gone off the rails that way. There's a lot of countries that have worked very hard to get away from it. New Zealand's the only country I know about that is constantly passing laws that seek to categorise and divide people up.
ACT Party leader David Seymour, thank you so much for joining us today. Ngā mihi.
Thank you. Ngā mihi.